Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly massive. We are going to unpack the sheer scale of India's educational transformation. I mean, when you look at the human capital formation happening in India right now, it is nothing short of breathtaking. To really wrap our heads around how a nation of over 1 billion people upgrades its skills, we're going to use a step-by-step learner's journey framework. We'll look at the data, the policies, and the real-world impact of one of the largest educational pushes in human history. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our syllabus for today. First, defining literacy in India. Second, the Sakshar Bharat success. Third, elementary education for all. And finally, secondary education and beyond. So we're essentially tracing the entire life cycle of education from foundational adult literacy right through to high school. Section 1. Defining literacy in India, the absolute foundation of education. Now, before we look at the staggering numbers, we really need to establish the ground rules for the data we're about to explore. So, what exactly is literacy? Well, according to the source data, it's defined as the ability of a person to read and write a simple passage in any language with understanding. It's a beautifully simple, functional definition. Notice how it's fundamentally about basic comprehension, right? It's not just about years spent in formal schooling. It's about unlocking that core ability to interact with the written word. And when we measure this across the whole country, we use something called the literacy ratio. This is simply the ratio of literate people to the total population of age 7 and above. Now, you might be wondering why age 7? Well, children below the age of 7 are deliberately excluded from this metric because, practically speaking, they just wouldn't have had the time to receive enough education to read and write with understanding yet. So the takeaway here is that tracking the increase in this specific ratio is the globally accepted indicator of how effectively education is spreading across the nation. When this number ticks up, it means human capital is actively being built. Section 2, the Sakshar Bharat success and the massive adult catch-up. Let's shift gears and look at adult education. Imagine missing out on those foundational years of schooling as a kid. To tackle that, the government launched a monumental program in 2009 called Sakshar Bharat. And this was highly targeted. It rolled out across 383 low female literacy districts in 25 states. And the results? Up to March 2017, this single program brought a staggering 192 million people to basic literacy. Think about that for a second. That is a population larger than most countries on Earth, suddenly equipped with the power to read and write. What's really interesting here is the breakdown of those beneficiaries. 3/4 of them, 75%, were women. By specifically targeting those low female literacy districts, this initiative directly went after historical gender gaps, ensuring women could finally participate equally in this huge wave of human capital formation. And you can actually see the macroeconomic impact of programs like this immediately. Over just 2 decades, the overall adult literacy rate in India made an impressive 20-point jump. It went from 61% in 2001 all the way up to 81% in 2020-21. And the data shows this increase wasn't isolated. It went up significantly for both males and females across the board. Now, an achievement on this scale absolutely did not go unnoticed on the world stage. For pulling off this massive human capital upgrade, the Sakshar Bharat program won the prestigious UNESCO King Sejong Literacy Prize in 2013. Just a fantastic example of targeted policy working on an almost unimaginable scale. All right, Section 3, elementary education for all, the fundamental right. Having looked at how adults caught up, let's look at the youth pipeline, starting with the critical foundation of elementary education. Let's walk through this elementary journey chronologically. It covers kids aged 6 to 14, split into 2 parts. First, you have primary school for classes I through V, which is for ages 6 to 10. Then they move up into upper primary for classes V through 8, catching the 11 to 14-year-olds. And this brilliantly illustrates a massive pivot point for India's youth. In November 2001, a constitutional amendment was passed, making the right to free and compulsory education for children in that exact 6 to 14 age group a fundamental right. It wasn't just a nice-to-have goal anymore, it was literally woven into the constitutional fabric of the country. But rights always come with responsibilities. Alongside this newly established fundamental right, it officially became the constitutional duty of parents and guardians to actually make sure their children are admitted to these elementary schools. Section 4, Secondary Education and Beyond, Preparing for the Labor Market. Once those foundational rights are met, young adults transition into the practical preparation phase for higher education and the modern workforce. Tracing these final school years, the secondary sector prepares students aged 14 to 18. First, you have secondary education for classes IX and X for ages 14 to 16. Then, senior secondary for classes 11 and 12, taking them right up to age 18. This is the crucial window where students are picking up the complex skills they'll need for the labor market. To make sure this vital stage doesn't become a bottleneck, India is constantly expanding access. In a lot of states, early secondary education, those classes I, X, and X, is completely free. On top of that, to ensure equity, children belonging to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes receive free education across all states nationwide. So, we've just traced an absolutely staggering journey. From 192 million adults catching up on basic literacy, to constitutional amendments guaranteeing education for young kids, right up to heavily subsidized secondary schools preparing teenagers for modern jobs. When you put all this together, it is one of the most aggressive human capital formations on the planet. So I'm going to leave you with this to ponder. How will hundreds of millions of newly literate adults and constitutionally protected students reshape not just India's future economy, but the entire global labor market in the decades to come? It's a huge question. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and we'll see you next time.